Okay, so we are going to color correct this image using a curves adjustment layer. Just to kind of review a few things, the way I have my panel set up is I have my properties on top of my adjustments, then I have my layers right underneath that. Over here I have my navigator, I have my history, I have my info panel, and then I have my histogram. I'll go ahead and expand my histogram view. Whoa, that's a big wheel. Don't do that. All right. And I actually want it to be in luminosity because I'm not really concerned about those color spikes. What I'm most concerned about is if I'm clipping my highlights or shadows. So to change that on your histogram, you just go to this flyout menu here and you just switch it to luminosity. I believe you can also do RGB as well. Alright, so I'll just leave that open and I'll actually just place this on the side there, histogram out. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a adjustment layer curve. Now I have my curve here. So when you're correcting color, the first thing you do is you always want to correct the density of the image. In other words, you want to correct the contrast. So we talked about curves last week, where the top of your curve represents your highlight, the bottom of your curve represents your shadow, and to make a contrast adjustment, you use a standard S-curve. So I'm going to go ahead and plot a point here. I'm going to drag it upwards to brighten the image. And I'm going to give it a little bit more depth by adding a point on the bottom of the curve. And now what I'm doing is I'm closing in on that difference between black and white. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the midtone region, and that exists in the center of your curve. Always keep in mind that your curve shouldn't have more than 3 points on it. The points that touch the edges of your histogram, I don't count those as plotted points. Those are just points that were already plotted there before you made any points. The points I'm referring to are points that you plot. So 1, 2, 3, that's the most I will ever have on my curve. The reason why I do that is because it can get very, very confusing to have more than 1 point as the line adjusts. So if I plot all these points here, it's like, whoa, what's going on? So you don't want to have more than 3 points. So to get rid of points, you just drag these off. Let me adjust that again so we can see our clouds. Okay, so now I did a contrast adjustment. It's not perfect, but Photoshop is a process of finesse. So up here we have our RGB channels. When I look at this now, the things that I like to check for color cast is I look for things that are supposed to be white, and I look for things that are supposed to be black. And most importantly, I check my shadow. Shadows, if you've taken a painting class, you know that shadows are on the cooler side of things. They tend to be a little bit more blue. But when we look at the world, we understand shadows as a value of gray. So with photography, that's what we're trying to target. We're trying to get our shadows to a neutral gray. So right now when I look at this shadow, it looks green to me. So I'm going to go ahead and go to RGB right here. If I hit the F3 key to reference my color wheel, you can see that if my shadow is green, that means I'm going to have to add magenta. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop. So we'll go to the green channel. And what you could also do is you can still utilize this click and drag tool. And you can place it on your shadow. And you can see on the curve line, that's where that green cast exists. It's towards the shadow area. So now if I drag that down, you can see that shadow is now adjusting and the image is already starting to look more correct. It's opening up, we're getting more separation. because what keeps it from having separation is a unifying color cast across the whole image. But if you eliminate that cast, you're able to recognize more points of difference. Because what was happening before was this area of the image was being united with the background with the green. So now I drop that down so we can see that that point's right there. But now when I look at this rope and I look at the white area here, and also this should feel, this silver or gray box feels kind of cold to me. You know, it's like there's shadow, there's clouds in the background, so there's some outcast happening. But it doesn't mean it can't be warm, or at least neutral. So let's go ahead and look at the blue channel. And with this clicked on, the click and drag, I'm just going to click on this white point here. It's telling me that this is in the mid-range value. So now if I drag up, it goes blue. But if I drag downwards, it's going to start going a little bit more warm. Just like so. And now I feel like we have some cyan in this image. So cyan, if we go over to our, we're going to go to the red channel. Cyan is across from red. So I'm going to go into the red channel. And now I'll click on this white point here. We'll add a little bit of red, and now look at the lifesaver is getting more red as well. Like that. But now when I look at the letters have some red inside of it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just hover over the red, and you can see that what it's doing is it's trying to plot a point towards the bottom of my curve. And it's telling me that you have some red cast inside of the black area. So I'll just drag that down. Now what I'm doing is I'm applying cyan just to the black point. Just like so. I'm going to go back to my blue channel. Now if I go into the water area, right here, if I drag upwards, my water goes more blue, but look what happens to my letters. My letters turn blue, so it's not correct. So we need to add a little bit of yellow to our blue channel in the shadow area. There. Now it's starting to feel a little bit more neutral, so let's go back. So this box to me on my screen looks green. Can everyone see the green cast in that box? Yeah. I'll now go to the green channel. All right, so it's telling me that that's where it's at. I already have a point there, so I'm just going to reselect that point. I'm going to drag down just slightly. And just a little tip that I have for you is whenever you adjust magenta, it's going to go more blue because that's its neighboring color. So we're going to have to add a little bit more yellow to get rid of that blue. And now this box here is starting to feel like the color it should be without its cast. All right, so now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back into the RGB channel because after we've corrected those colors, the image got a little darker. It got a little bit more contrasty. So I'm going to adjust my density of the image. I'm going to open up my shadow a bit, brighten it a little bit more. What I like to do sometimes if my highlight feels like it's a little bit too bright is I'll actually grab the very top of the curve and I'll just nudge it down just a little bit. And what that does is it helps make sure that you don't go out of your white point range, and it pushes all your values towards the center. So even if you are getting some clipping, what that does is it helps to gray out those bright whites for you. So that way, at least you're not printing paper white. And that there's a difference between your image and your sheet of paper. All right, so now I got a little bit of orange inside of here, but I think that's okay. If I brighten this up a little bit or darken it down, I'm gonna go 100%. I'm already at 100%. Small image. This looks like we have a little bit of orange in there. And if it feels orange, it's red. Exactly. So if I hover over here, it's telling me that I already have that point plotted. So I'm just going to click on it. And here's the other thing. Color is very, very sensitive. Like even just what I start to do is I use the arrow keys on my keyboard at this point, and I stop using my mouse. And what I'll do now is I'll dial it in. Whoa. I'll dial it in on the keyboard. So I have the bottom, if you look at my curve, I have the bottom point highlighted right now. It's activated. And now I can just nudge it to get that shadow, just to have a tiny, tiny bit of cyan inside of that shadow. Just like that. Oh. And now look at my silver box on my screen. With one click, it goes cold. One click, it goes warm. Do you see that?
No.
Okay, so look at the silver box. So cold, one click, warm. One click, cold, one click, warm. Color shifts. You still can't see it?
So subtle.
It's very subtle. Anytime you're color correcting gray, it is so, so challenging. Cement is like one of the hardest things to color correct because it goes cold really fast and it goes warm really fast. So let's go ahead and look at our history. Take a snapshot. That's where we started. And that's where we ended. That's pretty amazing what you can do with just one adjustment layer, right? In the Lynda tutorials that you will come across from this class that we're not going to jump too deeply into because I feel like they're more consumer based, and this is more on the commercial platform, and it also eliminates having to use a whole bunch of tools. You can do your contrast and color using just the curve. Let me go ahead and add a little bit more depth to this. When I reach a point to where I can't eliminate a color, what I'll then do is I'll jump into hue saturation. And if we go to our adjustment panel, that's going to be on the second row. So I'll open up a hue saturation and I'll zoom in again. So now you have a layer on top of your curves layer right here. And digital cameras tend to oversaturate. But if you're into that, run with it. But this is a way to eliminate color cast as well. So if right now I'm in the master, which would just do a global saturation. So I'm going to take down the saturation by maybe 5 points. And then what I'll do is I'll go into the yellow channel because I feel like this rope is a little too yellow for me. So I'll go into the yellow channel and I'll eliminate the saturation of the yellow. And then what I'll also do is I'll go into the green channel, see if I got any green in there, and look at that. I have green in there. So this helps you exaggerate where colors exist as well. So then I'll take away some of that green that's in there. Just like that. And now, whenever you desaturate an image, it tends to dull your image out a bit. So you have to do a color adjustment, a contrast adjustment again. So now I'll go ahead and brighten up my image. Let's bring up my histogram, make sure I'm still in safe range. Cycle that through. Histogram's looking good still. Everything has texture, information. Now if I turn off my layers, you can see those differences. Separation. This is something that definitely helps when you're shooting landscapes. If you have color cast in foliage, for instance, and if, say, that cast is green, leaves are green, but shadows aren't green. So if you add magenta, what it's going to do, it's going to deepen your shadow because it's going to add magenta to the shadow. And then it'll keep the leaves green. So then it'll open up your image a little bit more too, which is awesome. So notice that on each of my channels, never more than 3 points. When I'm working with color, I tend to just have 2 points in the color channel. And again, you're finding a balance. So I'm going up on the highlight, down in the shadow, or vice versa, depending on where the color cast exists.